What's going on? It's the Polygon Don here. Today I want to discuss a handful of overlooked games from the ever-increasing Nintendo Switch games library. Not the AAA first-party titles and not necessarily hidden gems or underrated games either. These are games that gain relative critical acclaim but for whatever reason, whether it's marketing, budgets or whatever else, only reach the small amount of people. So this series aims to highlight games that fall into that category. Let's take a look.
Not long ago, in a town much like yours, there was a young woman who was very happy. Until one day her heart broke so violently that her sorrow echoed through space and time.
Alright guys, first up we've got Sayonara Wild Hearts, which is essentially a rhythm game with action elements set in a hallucinogenic neon-lit dreamscape. Described by small indie developers Simogo as a pop album video game, it follows the story of a heartbroken young woman as she travels through an alternate reality to fight cursed arcana in order to restore harmony back into the world and maybe mend her own heart in the process. It consists of 23 imaginative levels to navigate through, each with its own song as the soundtrack and mood setter. The story's okay, but it isn't really what you play this game for. The music and the visual accompaniments are the standout features of it and they work perfectly together. The music itself, while not my go-to style for everyday listening, is incredibly well produced and performed and links up beautifully with what's going on screen. It's an 80s inspired synth pop soundtrack but with more modern sensibilities and influences. And as I said, the production on it is of an incredibly high standard, so if your TV is hooked up to some decent speakers or a good soundbar, this is a game you'll definitely want to play with the volume up. Also, while 80s synth pop is the main through line, the soundtrack does a great job of varying the tracks throughout the game's runtime. They're not all electro dance bangers. For instance, some areas of the game take a more somber tone and the soundtrack will reflect that with a synthetic orchestral ballad of sorts, or a chase sequence that featured a more stripped back instrumental hip hop beat. The carefully considered placement of the tracks works brilliantly and definitely reminded me of a well structured pop album, so the devs certainly realised their goal in that regard. With the majority of levels being on rails, there are some where the perspective and mechanics switch up completely, but on the whole you will be guided through levels at speed while you move only left and right to avoid obstacles and collect hearts, whilst also pressing buttons in time with the music. It's simplistic and intuitive, so literally anyone can play this game. In fact, it will serve well as a good gateway for any non-gamer out there to enter the wonderful world of video games. Each level is ranked at either bronze, silver or gold, and how many hearts you collect, obstacles you hit, or how well timed your button presses are all contribute to determining which trophy you end up getting. The creators do a really fantastic job of varying gameplay, as each level has its own rules and mechanics in place, making the first playthrough feel really exciting. As after a while you realise what's going on, and as each level reaches its conclusion you start anticipating what they've dreamt up for the next challenge. And there's also some really memorable boss fight levels in this game that I won't go into detail on now, as they're better experienced with fresh eyes and ears to be honest, but visually and acoustically they're incredibly impressive moments. While short, it's a highly stylised game that's constantly evolving and challenging your expectations, taking you from the hyper-real to the surreal on a rainbow of neon very quickly. So quickly in fact that if you weren't bothered about rankings and just played through each level once, you'd reach the credits in under 2 hours. Not a reason to be overlooked though, an experience all unto itself that stands out from the crowd in a fading genre. This rhythm game is definitely worth checking out and adding to the collection, especially as Queen Latifah is the game's narrator, which is just too cool and random for its own good.
The Old West was a hard place. The only thing in abundance was poverty and firearms. Combine alcohol and hopelessness with greed, envy, lust, and pride, and death is often the result. Crude cabins stood alone in the wilderness, cut off from the outside world. People knew to mind their own business, but isolated, they grew ignorant and superstitious.
Okay, and next up we have Hard West, which is a turn-based tactics game with light RPG mechanics set in a heavily fictionalized version of the American Wild West. In essence, and to break it down, it's Red Dead Redemption meets XCOM. Actually, it's more like the Red Dead spin-off Undead Nightmare meets XCOM, as its bleak and dusty world is also shared by supernatural elements like ghosts, zombies, demons, and even the devil. You'll follow Warren on his descent into the darkest recesses of the human soul when a tragic turn of events sets him down a path of supernatural chaos and revenge to brutally hunt down those who have wronged him. The narrator does an incredible job of setting the world's harsh Wild West theme with dialogue and tone, but it's not long until you realise it starts taking a far more supernatural deviation and at times even Lovecraftian. It's creepy, dreary and otherworldly, and I absolutely loved every second of it. You get an isometric view of the playing field and you control your party in a turn-based fashion to complete objectives and reach your goal, eliminating enemies en route. While this all sounds pretty straightforward and follows the standards set by games such as XCOM, the unique aspect of Hard West that sets it apart from the rest, aside from its brutal western aesthetic, is the luck mechanic, which we'll get into in a moment, and the game's other, albeit slightly less engaging mode of strategic exploration. In this exploration mode, you can freely move across the map, selecting various outposts, villages or merchants to engage with in order to acquire new gear, mine for gold, and generally prepare for the more gameplay heavy tactical encounters ahead. This mode is necessary not just for preparation, but it also serves as a means to further flesh out the characters and the story they are telling. However, gaining control of a cursor and selecting an area on the map to explore merely means bringing up a text window with a multiple choice list of replies to choose from, making this segment of the game resemble something closer to a point-and-click adventure or even a visual novel, but more drab. As I said, it's crucial to the game and I didn't completely hate it, but it was a noticeable step down in pace and overall production value when compared to the hard-hitting and colourful turn-based action of the game's main combat mode. Speaking of which, during combat every character starts their turn with 2 action points, which can be spent on either a move, a shot, a reload or to use a consumable. However, firing your weapon usually ends your turn even if you select it as your first action, so watch out for that. The game also uses a cover system with 2 main types of cover to choose from, half and full cover, effectively lowering the chance of getting hit and receiving damage. However, my favourite element of Hard West tactical gameplay is the luck mechanic mentioned earlier, or more specifically, the absence of encounters being determined by random number generation. Most other games that I've played in this genre rely on RNG to determine hits, so even if I was standing directly in front of an enemy who wasn't behind cover, I can still miss due to its randomness. That always infuriated me with games like XCOM if I'm completely honest. Hard West instead introduces the luck attribute, and one that governs all playable characters and NPCs, acting almost as a secondary life meter. For example, when selecting to shoot an enemy, the game may tell you that there's a 65% chance of hitting your target from where you are. If you go for the shot and miss, your target's life meter remains intact, obviously, but their luck meter will deplete by the hit chance percentage of the shot you just took, i.e. 65%. Whittling down an enemy's luck meter will guarantee a hit on the next shot attempt. I personally think this is such a better system to just plain old RNG, and allows for some really sneaky and tricky strategizing later in the game. On the whole, gameplay wise I loved it. I genuinely enjoyed playing through every level. The only frustrating element, which while a minor issue did crop up on quite a few occasions throughout my playthrough, was the camera. You don't get a full 360 degree rotational control, instead it jumps in 90 degree increments. Unfortunately, this can make it difficult to see exactly which tile you are selecting when moving characters. It's not always an issue, but when it is, it can get annoying. But that's my only real bugbear with the gameplay side of things. Other than that, the tactical combat was solid. There are also some light RPG mechanics in place, and playable characters can be improved with wearable gear and strengthened with abilities. Some being active that you initiate in battle using an action point, and others that are passive. There's also a leveling up system based on poker cards that replaces the traditional skill tree, This makes the RPG side of things a little watered down, but completing objectives in exploration mode regularly unlocked new poker cards, and trying them out in the upcoming battle was always fun. So while this game does have the odd consistency issues such as the slightly bland exploration mode, the gameplay in its combat mode was so satisfying, the few shortcomings I did find with it were easy to forgive. This game completely took me by surprise and hooked me from start to finish. If you're looking for a dark turn-based tactics game that stands out from the crowd and one with its own style and spin on the more traditional gameplay mechanics of other entries in the genre, then I highly recommend picking up a copy of Hard West next time you see it. Alright guys, and third up on the list we have Kaze and the Wild Masks. The game follows Kaze as she watches her friend Hugo be magically transformed by a curse that also affects the crystal islands that the game is set in, as the vegetables begin to act strangely and evoke an evil intent on taking over. It is now down to Kaze to free her friend and return the crystal islands to their former glory. As is kind of standard for these types of platformers, the story is paper thin and merely acts as a catalyst to get you jumping and spinning. The hand-drawn cutscenes are nice and definitely bring out the nostalgia feels for the cartoons I grew up with, but all of that would be for naught if the gameplay wasn't up to snuff. The game has been compared to classics such as Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario World, and that automatically sets the bar high and comes with certain expectations. Thankfully, this game delivers on almost every point. There are 4 crystal islands in total with around 8 levels in each and a boss fight to cap them off. You traverse from left to right with satisfyingly tight controls, jumping and spinning into enemies while meticulously landing on platforms and avoiding projectiles and obstacles. Kaze's long bunny ears wrap around her as she spins, forming a sort of protective barrier for her that also damages any unsuspecting evil veggies that get in her way. Actually, those same fluffy ears are incredibly versatile, as they also act as a propeller when holding down Y after jumping, allowing Kaze to stay in the air for longer and travel further. They can also grip vines and tight ropes etc. to reach bonus levels or collectibles. However, it's the wild masks that feature in the game's title that sets this game apart from its companions. You will discover 4 different masks across the islands that when worn will transform Kaze into one of 4 different creatures, drastically changing up the gameplay. For instance, with the mask of the eagle, Kaze will be able to fly, and with the mask of the shark, Kaze will obviously gain the ability to swim underwater. These moments are vastly different from the rest of the game, as on the whole entirely new gameplay mechanics are set in place and the traditional platforming takes a bit of a back seat. Honestly, these are such cool little sections of the game that are timed to perfection, switching things up at just the right moment so that at no point in my playthrough did I start to feel the fatigue that sometimes comes with playing a difficult platformer non-stop. Speaking of difficulty, Kaze comes with 2 settings offered to you before you start your playthrough, casual and original mode. Casual mode offers checkpoints and health which might be more appealing depending on how you like your platformers. Essentially it's all about precision, patience and memorization. Should you die, you will be sent back further in original mode than with casual mode, as there are fewer checkpoints. This means you'll have to remember more of the level if you want to progress without dying again. I opted for original and it's no cakewalk, let me tell you. I like that about it, but if there's some of you out there that love the look of these games but not necessarily the brutal difficulty that usually comes with them, it's nice to know that Kaze's got options. It offers up a fair bit of replay value too, as you're not likely to find everything in each level first time. Being able to level select anything that's been completed once so that you can go back for a clean-up operation is a nice addition that adds more longevity to the game, and so does exploration, as some of the hidden bonus levels can unlock even more areas to play through once completed. Kaze and the Wild Masks is a challenging side-scrolling action platformer heavily inspired by 90s 16-bit classics such as Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario World. Its unashamed cap-tipping homage to that era of gaming is evident in every frame, from its bright and gorgeous colour palette to the cute Saturday morning cartoon-ready mascot and enemy design. Every level is so lovingly created, it's a constant joy to look at and play. In fact, I recently found out that Kaze was actually created almost 30 years ago when the devs were just kids themselves and were infatuated by Nintendo and Sega games. Wanting to one day create their own platformer, they drew character models resembling what Kaze looks like today, eventually realising their dream decades later. Not sure if that's entirely true, but I like to believe it is and serves as a pretty decent reminder to persevere with your art. I genuinely hope this isn't the last we see of Kaze and the Wild Masks and a sequel gets greenlit. A brilliant game that I highly recommend to all Switch owners. Okay, and next up we have State of Mind from Daedalic Entertainment, a cyberpunk adventure game set in the year 2048 in Berlin and explores transhumanist themes and the overall impact technology has on humanity. The game follows Richard Nolan, a journalist waking up in a hospital after an explosion, only to find out that his family is nowhere to be found. Uncovering this mystery is the game's main focus. Gameplay, like many other adventure games, is a little thin on action. You'll play in a third-person perspective and will mainly be interacting with other characters, scanning objects and landmarks within the world to bring up additional information and solve the odd puzzle or complete a minigame. Now, it has to be said that a few of the narrative tropes within the game are a little overused, like how the two main characters have lost their memories, requiring you to piece things together while the game feeds the relevant info back to you slowly over the course of the runtime. Which in itself is fine, but it is a storytelling mechanic that has been well and truly overused by today's standards. There's a few other cliched moments like that within State of Mind, but on the whole it didn't bother me too much. What I did like is just how much of an utter swine the main character Richard Nolan is. Miserable, moody and insufferable.
Tracy, what is this bot doing here? I told you.
If you like, I can answer that question.
You shut your mouth.
There aren't many other video game protagonists out there that hit that fine balance of hero and twit, and I really appreciated it. Also, if his voice sounds familiar, that's because he is voiced by Doug Cockle, the same voice actor responsible for the gravelly tones of Geralt of Rivia in the Witcher series. State of Mind, if you haven't guessed already, is a narrative-based adventure game covering big themes regarding the future of the human race. You progress through interaction and information gathering from the world around you and the people inhabiting it, whether that's scanning objects or talking directly to NPCs. However, for me, it's the low poly art style that is the true standout element of the game and looks absolutely stunning on the Switch, whether in handheld mode or docked. Seriously, even some of the furniture design and architecture in this game got me on a screen capturing rampage. I have heard some people discuss how the game could have been different or even better if more gameplay mechanics were implemented. However, I have to disagree. State of Mind is all about the narrative it is telling and the world it builds through its sleek design. It's not going to be for everyone, so if slow-paced story development and exploration aren't your thing, then maybe swerve this one. But if you like narrative-driven games, then I suggest giving this a shot. In fact, this is an excellent game to play along with someone who isn't necessarily an affluent gamer themselves, giving you both the breathing room and time needed to fully appreciate the game's story without worrying about seeing a game over screen or memorising tricky controls. Those of you that do decide to play it, I think will have a great time, providing you know what you're getting into.
All right, Joey, I'm here. Let's see if we can find what you wanted me to see.
Alright guys, and lastly we got Bendy and the Ink Machine. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a first-person action horror game inspired by games like BioShock, but with its very own distinctive look and atmosphere. You'll play as Henry Stein, a retired animator who receives a letter from an old colleague, Joey Drew, inviting him back to the animation studio he once worked at so that Joey can show him something. What Henry finds is a seemingly abandoned studio overrun by an ink machine with an agenda and an increasing sense of foreboding. Playing as Henry, you'll navigate through a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors and rooms, solving puzzles, collecting certain objects, fighting enemies, or just running for your life, as you try and figure out just what the hell has happened to the office you used to work in. Gameplay is a mix of combat and puzzle solving, with both elements being rather surface level, to be honest. Physical actions are limited to just running, jumping and whacking should you find one of the game's few melee weapons, and the enemies vary in strength and resilience, forcing you to be tactical to a degree, keeping out of reach and only striking when an opening is available, etc. But even if you do die, the game doesn't really provide much in the way of punishment. You'll come back to life at the nearest spawn point with what little you had in your inventory still intact, and then just pick up where you left off. No real penalisation whatsoever. And the puzzles won't require much head scratching either, as they mainly consist of keeping your eyes wide open for items to interact with and the odd bit of backtracking. That isn't to say that this made me enjoy the game any less. In fact, it worked well with the game's overall runtime of around 5 to 7 hours, allowing story and momentum to keep pushing forward. But for some, the lack of depth and nuance in the combat and puzzles might be a deciding factor, so I thought I'd mention it. To be honest, as you've been seeing on screen, it's the game's design and atmosphere that is the real draw and the sole reason I picked it up in the first place. Clearly a take on animated classics from the 1920s and 30s with shorts like Steamboat Willie, its world is fun, familiar and playful until it isn't. The first chapter does a great job of setting the mood and tone. Family-friendly animations start to look twisted and dark, and I've read somewhere that that's exactly the intention, as maybe the cartoons of the past aren't actually as innocent as we remember and are more sinister the more you look at them. The excellent sound design will start to gradually get under your skin too, such as the echoing drips of the black ink oozing from every pipe or the heartbeat that starts to get louder and louder as you're being chased. There are occasional jump scares that punctuate the loneliness experienced by the player, with some being more discreet and creepy than others, but all works well at providing a constant sense of unease. This game also does a great job of making you feel like you're being watched. A lifeless cardboard cutout peering round a wall, or returning to a room only to find something you previously broke had been repaired or moved. It can get the hairs on the back of your neck suddenly springing to attention. It's not a terrifying game, but it certainly succeeds in the creepiness factor. I wanted to include Bendy on this list, as even though this does have quite a large and dedicated fan community eagerly awaiting the sequel that's currently in development, every Switch owner I've ever asked over the last year has never heard of it, which is a shame as it's such a mad one and unlike anything else. Being divided up into chapters and each one being roughly an hour long, this makes it a great late evening nightcap and feels right at home on the Switch. Turn the lights off and take a trippy tour in this unsettling sepia tone classic.
Rest your head. It's time for bed.
Alright guys, that's 5 games for the Switch that I think deserve a little more exposure. Let me know in the comments what games you think are criminally underrated, must-owns for the system. Any suggestions will be massively appreciated, as it's always good to hear what you guys are playing. And if you're new to the channel and also happen to own any PlayStation consoles, then feel free to check out my other videos. If you like what you see, click subscribe to stay updated on all future content. There will be more videos covering the Switch in the future, but for now I'm working on Volume 3 of my PS4 Hidden Gem series, and also working on some Wii and GameCube content too. But for now I'm out. Take care, be good, and game on.